All right, go.
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? It is a reunion. Welcome to the shop. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Dynasty Diagnostic podcast. My name is Eitan Mozia. You can find me on Twitter at Eitan Mozia. I'm here with Sam Stompy Lane. You can find him on Twitter at FFStompy. And we also have the pleasure of having one of the most multi-talented and multifaceted Dynasty minds on the planet. I should probably even add Debbie to that. You can find him on one of the greatest Dynasty shows out there on Dynasty Dummies. It's a misnomer. I'm telling you. He's too humble for what he should be. And you can hear his work on the intros of many of your favorite podcasts. Please welcome Tacit Assassin 13 if you're following on Twitter. Himself, Mr. Zach Reed. What's going on, Zach?
Not too much, Eitan. That's a little over the top. I mean, I'm just a guy who figured out that Clyde Edwards-Helaire rhymed with the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I mean, that's pretty much it.
I mean, well, you got to give yourself more credit than that, because I couldn't come up with those lyrics. I have no musical aptitude whatsoever. I'm just like, how does he do that?
Well, that's me putting my my $80,000 creative writing degree to good use here. No, it's fun, man. It's I grew up on Weird Al. I saw there was a niche that needed to be filled in the Dynasty community. No one was doing analysis in long form song, and so it had to happen.
I love it, man. DJ Chark, do. Rest of my life. Rest of my life.
No, that's in my head. and everybody who's listening's head, because I swear to God, they all know that stupid song.
You've heard it. If you listen to our show, you've heard it.
Man, I can't even take credit for that one. That was my son. That was my 6-year-old.
Oh, there we go. It runs in the family. I love it.
Your 6-year-old's the one that loves aquariums and stuff, right?
Oh, yeah. Great. I have an autistic son, and he is absolutely brilliant. And man, his mind is just he wants to be a marine biologist. He's obviously a singer songwriter. He's a man of many talents, a Renaissance man. So
there you go.
I'm proud of that.
Next generation is coming quicker than we all realize. Man, I'm so excited to finally have the gang back together again. It's only been one episode for you guys, but FF Stompy, as you know, has been kind of under the radar for the past month or so, so it's really, really good to have him back. I just want to make sure that we give him a really, really big, hearty, huge hug, like a collective hug from the Dynasty community, welcoming you back. Sam, how was your vacation, and what are you looking to get into now that, it's go time in Dynasty Leagues?
I think I have an addictive personality. I jumped into politics, which is far, far worse for my health than fantasy football. So I'm really glad to be back. I mean, obviously, we're not, as Dynasty players, we don't just quit after the season. So we grind basically the entire season, and even like a 16 games or a 17 game season for us in fantasy is, if you're like me and writing a column every week and recording twice a week for podcasts, it kind of gets in your head a little bit. So I had to take a month off, but I'm really excited to be back. I'm excited to talk football. With the one thing that I'm really looking forward to, I'm figuring out an article, and this is a shout out to Peter Howard at PA Howdy, about second-year wide receivers and their breakouts, and how I don't necessarily think a third-year wide receiver breakout's a myth, but a lot of people overlook those second-year wide receivers. And got me really interested was this past season when we saw DJ Chark, Cortland Sutton, a little bit of DJ Moore, even though we saw it last season. Anthony Miller came on late towards the end of the season. We saw a lot of these second-year wide receivers kind of take that step forward. Christian Kirk as well. So I kind of want to look at that and then try and look at some of those second-year wide receivers that perhaps you can buy low, like N'Keal Harry, though. We'll see about that. I would think that people who invested in N'Keal Harry aren't going to be selling low, but Paris Campbell, guys like that who could take a step forward in this next season and who you should be looking at going into the future if somebody's looking to sell. So that is going to be my project here early on. So look out for that here soon.
Yeah, one of the huge takeaways from that A Howdy data was that it wasn't just that second-year wide receivers are kind of like the new thing to look at. It's that second-year breakouts from wide receivers are actually more common than third-year breakouts from wide receivers. What we find is there was the old kind of saying that, it takes 3 years to really see a wide receiver kind of evolve into their final form. But what Peter found was that generally happens at the second year. So, of course, we have to go into all the guys you just mentioned, as well as kind of looking for a few others here that might just kind of be floating just under the radar enough to be acquirable, but be very, very useful very, very soon in Dynasty Leagues as soon as the 2020 season. And we will segue into that in just a bit. But right now, we're kind of going to get into just some of the top storylines that we've had to deal with and that we've heard over the past few days, a few weeks here. Obviously, the Super Bowl has to be the number one point here. It was strong defense versus strong offense. And as we all should know by now, strong offense won. Is there anything that's more complex than that maybe we're missing, that maybe we can draw some lessons from, that you think that was a standout point, Zach, or was it kind of just as simple as that?
No, if you can throw the ball and move the ball through the air, you're going to win. And obviously, if you can't stop Damian Williams, you're not going to stop the Chiefs at all, period. But, man, Patrick Mahomes is absolutely incredible. Although as a Pats fan, it's hard for me to even recognize that there was a Super Bowl this year. No, it was actually nice to just watch one and not have to be like completely invested and actually enjoy the game. So it was, man, Mahomes is fantastic.
Well, and I'll give credit to the 49ers. They played him great the first three quarters, but when you let the playmaker make plays, he put up a monster fourth quarter. Probably deserves the MVP, though. Damian Williams. We need to talk about Damian Williams because he was a point of, we'll say, contention this past offseason. I would say he's probably in the same boat again this offseason because of the way he played towards the end of the season and in the playoffs.
Here's the difference, though, for me this year, and I saw Nick Whalen put this out just recently, a poll about what would you give up for Damian Williams right now. And I think he started off with a mid-second and kind of went down, and people weren't biting on the mid-second. People were saying a late second, early third. To me, he's a buy there. Last year, we were talking about a second round or a third round startup pick. And that's the difference between last year. I was out on Damian Williams because his value was incredibly high. Now I think he's a buy.
Yeah. And I think it has everything to do with, again, just being properly valued. Too many people kind of get hung up on, is this guy a top 12, top 24 at the position? That matters. That's very, very important. But the other side of that, and probably I would say the more important side of all of that, is deciding what that is going to cost to actually be on your team and what that's going to cost in terms of opportunity cost if you hold him instead of selling at that point. There is ebb and flow with hype. There is ebb and flow with value. And I think these are the things that sometimes go overlooked in dynasty leagues. And I think you guys just made a perfect example of same player, essentially the same situation, but two different outlooks just based on what you're getting from the rest of the dynasty community.
Yeah, have you seen the movie Hook? I know it's an all. I'm dating myself.
Did you know Glenn? Hold on, I got it. Did you know Glenn Close makes a
cameo? She's in the box. Boo! But But there's the scene where Rufio, the Lost Boys are trying to choose between Rufio and Peter Pan, and Rufio will make a point, and all the Lost Boys run over to Rufio's side, and then Peter Pan will make a point, and everybody runs back over to Peter Pan. And that's what we do as a Dynasty community. It's what have you done for me lately? What have we seen last? And we just run back and forth. I mean, AJ Brown was a top 8 receiver at the end of the year according to Dynasty. I mean, that's insane to me. And I love AJ Brown, don't get me wrong, but like the value, the peaks of value where we see something most recently, it's just crazy to me, and it's something to be exploited.
I agree with that. I'm going to give a shout out to our friend John Hogue, who, while I think it's stubborn, I will say I will give him credit that he stands pat a lot longer than most people in the Dynasty industry in terms of player rankings, which probably should be the how we should be throughout the industry is, yeah, okay, we can see a good 8-game stretch, but can he reproduce it? There are a lot of knee-jerk reactions to, just look at like Adam Thielen, for example. That first 8 games in 2018 put him as the wide receiver 1 on a lot of people's boards, and then he just fell off the face of the planet in the second half. Not taking away that he's a great wide receiver. It's just we reacted to an 8-game stretch, and he hasn't been really able to repeat that in the second set of 8 games, or even last season, of course, the injury notwithstanding. So I definitely agree with that. One other point I want to make with that Super Bowl is it really is the questions here for me are the 2 quote unquote starting running backs. I mean, we already talked about Damian Williams, but what about Raheem Mostert now? I mean, he's on his 7th team. He finally got his chance. He's 27 now.
About to be a free agent too, I believe.
About to be a free agent. Tevin Coleman signed that 2-year deal. I mean, we saw him a little bit, but he basically got his job taken away by Raheem Mostert. And then what happens with Matt Breida? I believe Matt Breida might be a free agent. No, he signed. Did he sign?
No, unless he just recently did. I think he's a free agent as well.
But yeah, I mean, what's the running back situation in San Francisco as well? Are they going to I think they have to continue to run the ball, just because I don't think Jimmy G's a good quarterback by any stretch of the imagination. Sure, he can throw those games out there, but would you say Alex Smith is a quarterback that you want leading your team to a win? And that's how I view Jimmy G.
Hey, let's not disrespect Alex Smith. Alex Smith holds on to the football. All right.
Well, it's fine. The point is that Jimmy Garoppolo's a game manager at best, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do with Mostert. I mean, he signed a 2-year deal last offseason as well, but he's old. And what are they going to do? They're going to probably cut Jet McKinnon now. After he hasn't played a single snap for them in 2 seasons. So it's interesting to see what San Francisco will do with that backfield next season.
And I think any conversation that surrounds the San Francisco 49ers kind of is going to go into a point that we're going to make a little bit later on in this episode. Cap's tightening for some of these teams. Cap's tightening actually for the 2 teams that were in the Super Bowl. The Chiefs in 2020 have reported just $16 million left in cap space. The 49ers have $13 million left in cap space. Both of those are bottom third in the NFL. Both of those don't really put them in a situation to be very, very active when it comes to free agency this year. And there are a heck of a lot of free agents out there that you wouldn't see on a normal year-to-year basis. This is one of the most stacked free agent classes we've seen in a while, and these teams are going to be cash-strapped. So, I mean, against the backdrop of all of that, I think you also need to understand that, I mean, these good performances by these RBs are in these specific situations. Things can change very quickly. I think a lot of people attribute success and attribute fantasy points to the player, almost not realizing that the player's opportunity in that specific offense had a lot to do with that as well. Derrick Henry is another guy we can have a conversation about kind of concerning that notion in just a moment here, but let's talk about kind of these 2 teams as a whole. are these teams that we can see really getting to the highest levels of success again and often, let's say in the next decade or so? Is this something that we kind of assume is a norm, or is one of these teams better positioned to be a contender for longer than the other one?
Well, I think you look at these two teams and you've got Damian Williams at run. I mean, we're talking about the backfield. You've got Damian Williams, who was a cast-off from Miami, was a third-string running back in Kansas City last year until injury propped him up. Same thing in San Francisco. You've got kind of an amalgamation of nobodies and Tevin Coleman. I mean, think about Tevin Coleman being like the highest pedigreed back in the backfield in San Francisco. So, yeah, I think you can do it. And these are two teams that you want the backfields of. I mean, they're two really prolific offenses. They're two teams that move the ball, score a lot of points, and are really kind of ingenuitive with the way they run the ball too. It's not just, 3 yards in a cloud of dust up the middle. It's a lot of stretch plays to the outside. It's a lot of movement and misdirection and getting some big holes for their backs. And so, look, it's probably not going to be Raheem Mostert for the long term in San Francisco. There's going to be somebody else that comes in eventually, and that's somebody I'm interested in.
Now, before we get off of San Francisco completely, we just talked about value versus perceived value and why we should be cognizant of the difference between the two there. On one of the biggest stages, the Super Bowl, obviously, we saw Deebo Samuel ball out. Do we think that Deebo Samuel is a locked-in top 15 wide receiver next year, top 24 wide receiver next year, or top 30 wide receiver next year? And what are the reasons that we have maybe some misgivings about crowning him the next A.J. Brown as quickly as that is?
Jimmy Garoppolo. That's all I'm going to say. Listen, like the issue, you almost could predict after, well, I shouldn't say you predict, but when they started to get, the Chiefs started to get momentum, you really kind of could have seen what was going to happen. Because once Mahomes started throwing the ball and once Kansas City stopped the run, you were relying on Jimmy G to make plays. Jimmy G doesn't make plays. Jimmy G, like I said, is a game manager. He can make some throws, but he can make some big mistakes. And you saw it. He threw an interception on basically the biggest drive of his life. So Deebo, they're going to use, Shanahan's mind, and we could talk about that all day and how Shanahan choked again, but Shanahan's mind will make him, allows Deebo to be used in very unique ways. Whether it's running the ball, catching the ball, we saw Deebo's speed. So I think top 24 pretty easily. Once we start getting above that, top 18, top 16, top 12, I can't do it. I don't think this offense is going to support it. Second, I don't think that Jimmy G is going to be able to get Deebo to be a wide receiver one.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sam, on that. I do think Deebo is San Francisco's one, but I don't think that San Francisco's one is a top 12 wide receiver. I think that top 24 you're feeling really good about. I think it was 4 or 5 games in. We did a show on the Dynasty Dummies, and actually the open was a Deebo Samuel song, and that was the thing. It was get Deebo on your team at that point before he blew up, because he'd had a 100-yard game and you could see the way he was going to be used. But I think the consistency is not necessarily going to be there.
And then I think you also have to kind of put into this the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo, being the starting quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, given their cap issues that I just outlined, might not necessarily be something that is going to last very, very long. We actually had this conversation about halfway into the season, Sam and I, Jimmy Garoppolo's contract is a very interesting one. For 2000, I can't even say words now. For 2018 and 2019, Jimmy Garoppolo was essentially locked in. Nothing could happen to him as the starting quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers because his contract was front-loaded. But going into next season and into 2020, Jimmy Garoppolo actually has a cap hit of $26.6 million against a dead cap of just $4.2 million. Now, that's not to say that Jimmy Garoppolo isn't a decent quarterback. I think you need to be a decent quarterback regardless of how good your team is or how good your defense is to get to where Jimmy Garoppolo got. But does a guy like Jimmy give you that added value over above average NFL QB that really wants you to feel comfortable not taking that $22 million savings when you're in a cap that's as tight as the San Francisco 49ers are?
Well, I think one of the big things we need to look at is what happened last season with Nick Mullins. Now, I don't know what Nick Mullins' contract looks like. He was an unsigned free agent or undrafted free agent, right?
He's there for a few years.
Okay, so I mean, if Nick Mullins is going to be able to do what Jimmy G does, I think that is going to free up a lot of cap space for San Francisco, and I don't know why that wouldn't be the option they go. But then again, maybe it's okay. Well, Jimmy G, quote unquote, led us to a Super Bowl, and we need to stick with him.
Yeah, I think we fall into the trap as fantasy analysts where we can see the logical path as, you know, the way to build a team in the NFL would be to cycle through quarterbacks on rookie deals, because unless you have a top 5 quarterback, that middle 20 is basically, it doesn't matter. They're interchangeable parts. It really doesn't matter who you've got. So why not use the cap relief of a rookie deal to help you build an offensive line, a defensive backfield to put you in a position to win? The problem that the NFL has is they're also making money based on revenue from fans, based on revenue from TV. And so it matters that, you know, Jimmy Garoppolo with that chin dimple and, you know, that smile, that he's selling tickets, he's selling jerseys, he's the face of the franchise. And so I would cut Jimmy G in a heartbeat. I would. If I was the GM, if I didn't have to worry about any of that other stuff, he's gone. We'll cycle somebody in, whether it's Nick Mullins, whether we're drafting, you know, Love in the second round this year, and it's setting something up like what Buffalo has, where you've got a little bit of a running quarterback and that sort of thing. But it doesn't work quite that way in the NFL.
Yeah, public pressure can definitely do that to an organization, so I definitely do understand where you're coming from, Zach. But I will say, just as kind of a final point on this, that Nick Mullins is an exclusive rights free agent on the San Francisco 49ers. Essentially what that means is he has less rights than a restricted free agent. San Francisco can negotiate the deal that San Francisco wants to negotiate with Nick Mullins, and there isn't much that he can do about it. So if you are the GM in San Francisco, if you're sitting in the chair of John Lynch, you have options. You have options to be able to keep this team that was able to propel Jimmy Garoppolo to the Super Bowl this year around him if you want it. It's kind of just up to you how you want to deal with that situation. But I'm going to move on from the San Francisco 49ers. We are going to move on to the London Jaguars. Not now, but I'm sure it will be in like the next 2 years. We'll get that little message kind of across your ticker saying that the Jags have officially moved to London. 2 home games in London this year. Shad Khan, he's the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's also the owner of a number of football clubs in England and the surrounding areas. I mean, what does this mean for the Jacksonville Jaguars? Do we think that the Jaguars stick it out in Florida for the long haul? Or do we think that maybe it doesn't necessarily matter because this is kind of a fire of an organization anyway?
I wonder what the tax rate is in London, because I know Florida, the income tax is zero, so that's a big kind of draw for players to go play in Florida, as you don't have that income tax. So I don't know how that will impact free agency, but I like the 9:30 games, the 9:30 a.m. I'm here on the East Coast. That's beautiful for me.
Not for me at all. Over here on the West. But can the Jacksonville Jaguars, for as long as they're the Jacksonville Jaguars, be a viable kind of up-and-coming NFL team for the next few seasons? They have some pieces in Gardner Minshew, whatever you decide who wins that battle between Minshew and Foles. You have Fournette for at least another season before you have to make a decision on him. DJ Chark is going to be there for at least 2 to 3 more seasons. I think D.D. Westbrook is still there at least for one more. So there are some pieces on offense. On defense, obviously, with the departure of Jalen Ramsey, that's an entirely different defensive unit we're talking about. But they have guys like Josh Allen on the defensive line that can make you believe in that team all over again. Is this a team that we think can be competitive for the near future and maybe ward off a potential move from just fan support, from supporting a team that happens to find themselves in the playoffs?
With Doug Marrone and now Trent Baalke, no. You either need a relatively high-powered offense or you need a good defense to win, to be viable. That defense is no longer what they were in 2017. That offense, while Gardner Minshew gave us flashes and gave us some hope, it wasn't high powered. Leonard Fournette is due for some positive regression next season in terms of touchdowns specifically. He finally showed us what kind of player he could be this season. But yeah, I mean, the way Doug Marrone plays, I just can't, or coaches, I can't see them being viable unless they build that defense, like build it. And so I don't think that's going to happen in the near future.
This is a stat from, I believe, Scott Barrett on Twitter. Trent Baalke has had 30 picks in the first 3 rounds in all the time that he's been a GM. Of those 30 picks in the first 3 rounds and the countless other late round picks, 4 Pro Bowlers are all he can call, or all he can really place his full faith and his full authority on in terms of the guys that he actually brought to that team. Are things going to be any different?
He also alienated a coach that brought him back to back. Well, not back to back, but he brought him to the NFC
the Super Bowl.
Were they in back to back Super Bowls?
They weren't back to back Super Bowls, but he brought him to the Super Bowl once.
And then they brought him into 2 NFC championships and tried to alienate him. So, I don't know why guys like that continue to get chances, but we continue to see it time after time in the NFL. Just recycling these coaches. You just don't see new blood anymore. I don't know. I mean, you went from Tom Coughlin to Trent Baalke. I don't think much is really going to change here.
Yeah, look, for me, from a dynasty context, you're interested in Chark. If you're playing Superflex, which I don't get to talk about an awful lot because Kyle Lebrecht, who is my co-host, is vehemently against 2 quarterbacks, Superflex, anything like that. He's very vanilla. The other asset you're interested in is Leonard Fournette. For me, he's a sell right now because he just came off a season where he had 70 catches because he was in a backfield with nobody. I fully expect that the Jaguars add a pass-catching running back to that backfield, which now all of a sudden takes Leonard Fournette, who is, I think, RB12 or I'd have to look that up. So he was in between like 7 and 12 with 70 catches. He's not going to be a top 12 running back this year. He's going to be right on that cusp of 15-ish. He's a sell for me, hardcore.
Do you not think that any drop-off in receptions from Leonard Fournette can be offset by an increase in touchdowns just from opportunities?
I mean, maybe, but you're looking at a team that we just said was not a great offense. And so now you're counting on how many touchdowns do you think he's adding? You think he's going to add 5 or 6? I mean, probably a couple I could see happening, but I really see him, and this is how I've always kind of viewed Fournette, and I was a little low on him coming out, but he is right at that cusp of a running back one, like low end running back one. Like that's where he really sits. And he's a very good player, but he's also now he's his 4th year in the league. Like we're at a point now where I can kind of ease my way back off him and be happy about getting a good return because he just came off a career year.
Do you feel the same way about DJ Chark? Is DJ Chark somebody that we're kind of putting a lot of faith in continuing to do what he did this year, or is he somewhere between the first and second year, kind of, that maybe top 25 receiver that kind of gets you through it?
If I can get somebody like Calvin Ridley in a deal for DJ Chark, I'm pulling that trigger.
And honestly, you could probably get Calvin Ridley plus at this point with the hype this season.
And I'm pulling the trigger on that because I'm a lot more comfortable with the way Calvin Ridley wins and the situation that Ridley is in than I am with DJ Chark having to get the big play down the field in an offense that I don't trust.
Also, you have to kind of put in there that the Falcons are going to have to make a decision on Austin Hooper. They don't necessarily have all the cap space in the world as well. Austin Hooper got nearly as many targets. In fact, I think he got as many targets as Calvin Ridley last year. So that's a big draw as well. Mohamed Sanu also no longer part of that.
Yeah, and you're gonna kill DJ Chark's targets when Hooper ends up in Jacksonville as their tight end.
Hey, don't you dare! Josh Oliver is coming back at some point.
Man, it's going to be interesting times in Jacksonville. It's going to be interesting times in seeing what happens to that team. But, I mean, just kind of from an outside perspective, it's not looking great, Bob. It's not looking great.
I just want to add one point. The news coming out, I believe it was yesterday and today, they were talking about the 2 games in Jacksonville and something about revenue and not wanting to be in the bottom quarter of the league. And then they hired Trent Baalke, and I was like, you guys are just, I don't know what you're doing here. you got those 2 eyes looking in 2 different directions here.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of, I guess, maybe just kind of an old boys club syndrome that happens to be kind of rearing its head with that team. And we're going to see that for a while, unfortunately. But now let's move on to another tight end, not Josh Oliver, also not Austin Hooper, who's not coming to Jacksonville, please God. But let's move to another tight end, an older tight end who was a stalwart for many, many years on the Carolina Panthers. They've decided that they will mutually part ways, quote unquote, mutually part ways with Greg Olsen this year. Greg Olsen is now scheduled to meet, or I think even has at this point met with both officials in Washington as well as officials in Seattle. Do we think that he would be a good addition to either team? Does he have anything left to offer any team in the NFL at this point?
Great in the booth.
Yeah, good Lord. What are you doing? Just retire, dude. You have a job waiting for you. You literally have a job waiting for you.
Multi-million-dollar job, I might add.
And you don't have to. Well, and I guess Washington's the only place that makes sense, I guess, in terms of what's available, because Will Disley showed us. I mean, he's been injured 2 straight seasons, but he was a monster when he was playing last season. I mean, it doesn't make sense for him to go to Seattle. And he's what, 38? He's probably not 38. He's like 36, 37. He needs to be done at this point.
Yeah, there's no way a guy that's my age should be out there playing tight end, getting beat on, banged on. He's had a great career, probably I shouldn't say probably Hall of Fame. He's right on the cusp of that. He's pretty good.
I think longevity wise, absolutely.
But man, just head up in the booth. Maybe he can replace Booger. We can.
Oh God, please. But I mean, yeah, make $1 million just talking about football. Why not do that for the rest of your life?
Now, you mentioned Will Dissly. You didn't mention Jacob Hollister. He's a restricted free agent in 2020. Do we think Seattle takes a shot at maybe keeping him in town and maybe just using the duo and hoping that through the season one of those guys stays healthy enough to kind of give them what they need at that position moving into the playoffs next year?
I don't know. That's tough. I mean, you have Lockett, you have Metcalf. I mean, you have a second wide receiver there now, a reliable wide receiver, and then you get Will Dissly in there, plus the running backs that they use in the passing game. I don't know why they would keep Jacob Hollister. I mean, they might extend him a qualifying offer, but I don't think they keep him around. Yeah, it doesn't make financial sense at all.
It all depends on what he gets for offers in other places. I mean, if he doesn't get anything, bring him back. That's great. If he does, then I don't think that there's going to be too much. They're not going to miss him too badly.
All right. One of the biggest offseason storylines is going to be the secondary and tertiary receivers out in Denver. Tim Patrick is no longer going to be there. Deshaun Hamilton, I mean, I don't necessarily know if the Denver Broncos saw what they wanted to see out of him this year when Emmanuel Sanders was eventually traded. Courtland Sutton essentially is locked in as the wide receiver one on that team. Noah Fant, I think, is, for all intents and purposes, that team's wide receiver too. But aside from that, there's a lot of spaces to kind of fill out there in Denver. I've seen a lot of guys mocked to that spot. I've seen Henry Ruggs mocked to that spot. I've seen Laviska Shenault mocked to that spot. Is there one of these wide receivers that we think will be that number one choice for a Broncos offense that's going to be rolling with an inexperienced QB moving into the 2020 season?
Stompy, that's your team, man.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, and with Courtland Sutton, I definitely agree that they need another outside threat, with Courtland Sutton being the more 50-50 ball guy, not the – I mean, he can be a deep threat at times. I liken it a little bit to, and it's probably a good comp at this point, the Detroit Lions with Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones. And that's what they need. They need that outside receiver. And Zach and Aton decided to waste some content before we even started recording about Laviska Shenault. But we can go ahead and talk about Laviska Shenault. But he's raw. He's fast. He was used in running back packages. Like he's a very dynamic type of wide receiver that they could definitely use. But if you are wanting to, and Zach mentioned the rookie rookie quarterback windows, if you are wanting to win now, I think you need a more polished wide receiver on that outside to match with Courtland Sutton. I do think DeJohn Hamilton serves a good underneath role. I think there were flashes in 2018 and again this season at times. So he's a good underneath slot wide receiver, which is where he excels. But yeah, they need that speed. I've seen a lot of Henry Ruggs to Denver, and while I think a lot of people probably don't know enough about him because of his teammate in Judy out there, he seems like he could be a good fit next to Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, if you're just looking to stretch the field, I think Ruggs can do that. He's very fast. And I would love to see him kind of on the other side of that Denver offense, because he's not a player who gets off press exceptionally well. In watching him, I see a lot of he false steps when he gets off the line. So I think his long speed is better than his short area quickness. But he's very good at going down the field, and he's pretty good over the middle, so he can kind of serve a dual role there. But for me, I think there are a couple of guys who are maybe a little more versatile. Tyler Johnson out of Minnesota, who you wouldn't have to spend, I don't believe, as high a pick on as Ruggs. I've seen Ruggs being mocked in the first round a lot, which makes me a little hesitant. I don't know that I would draft him there, but somebody like Tyler Johnson who can kind of do a little bit of everything. And I also, I love Justin Jefferson out of LSU, but he's more of a slot receiver. So then I guess you're having to figure out what you're doing with Deshaun Hamilton. But Jefferson can get down the field out of the slot, which is a nice feature.
So another player on this list that Eitan has listed next to Henry Ruggs is Jalen Reagor. And that's interesting. I saw Ray, our friend Ray GQ from last episode. I saw him post something on, or I guess re-emphasize on Twitter, that he reminds him a lot of Percy Harvin. And we know Percy Harvin being that speed type of guy. It's tough to see how that fits. And if it is, they don't like Deshaun Hamilton and they need a more dynamic wide receiver who can fit on the inside and the outside and use that speed. Jalen Reagor seems like he could be a good fit in Denver. Like you said, Eitan, they have a speed guy in Noah Fant that can play on the outside, play on the inside. So he and Jalen Reagor could just run around and line up anywhere, and that could be definitely an interesting add if they wanted to go that route.
Now let's move this on to, well, this is just by coincidence, but another AFC West team that is going to need a lot of help at receiver this offseason. Is there a perfect fit out there for Oakland?
Oh, they need a one, man. They need like CeeDee Lamb. They need somebody who can go get it.
I like that a lot. And I hate it as well. Being a Broncos fan, how dare you, Eitan? Like they're listening to us. Oh yeah, no, that's a good idea. But yeah, I mean, if they got CeeDee Lamb, I would. Oh God, just nope. I'm not going to even put that out in the universe. Nope.
I think the overarching consensus is Derek Carr is going to be back. One of the, I guess, major drawbacks from kind of mocking receivers to the Raiders, or even thinking that free agents were going to go to the Raiders, a guy like Robbie Anderson, for example, is the limitations of what Derek Carr does with the football and the short passing kind of to a fault, in the same way as we kind of see from a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo. If he's not there anymore, there's a few options that are kind of intriguing out there. Jameis Winston has kind of been put in to be an option in the event that he is a free agent this offseason. We don't know what's going to happen with Tom Brady. I don't know if Phillip Rivers would move to the Raiders, but he's another potential free agent this offseason. And that's not even kind of counting the rookies who are going to come in to just being able to be used this year. There's at least 4 or 5 rookies that I would expect to see game time coming up to this next season at the quarterback position in this draft. Is there maybe a scenario where we get one of these bigger arm guys that really makes CD kind of the number one target in that scenario? Or is this just a scenario where maybe we're looking for a receiver that's a little bit more well-rounded, a receiver that maybe can do a little bit of it all more than kind of be a deep threat for the Oakland Raiders because of the limitations of the quarterback room?
Well, I'd say, and I think CeeDee Lamb can do it all. Like I really do. That's he's by far and away my wide receiver one in this class. And you watch him a couple times and you're like, he's not that fast. I'm not really sure how he wins. And then you watch him a little bit more and you're like, he is that fast. He's just smooth. Like he's probably a 4-5 guy, but he's smooth. Everything he does just is effortless. and he can win down the field. He can win short. He can win with physicality. He can win with technicality. So, like, I still think that he is head and shoulders the wide receiver one in this class. And so if that's what you're looking for, if Las Vegas, because that's where they're headed. I just saw that the NFL is gonna list them on their metric sheets as LV. So if you're an analyst, Peter Howard, I know you're listening. It's LV now. So when you sort your sheets, that's gonna screw you all up. But no, like this is the type of player I think. Oh, look, Darren Waller was their best receiver last year. He is not going to be their best receiver this year. They're going to do something, or they're going to be awful. And CeeDee Lamb would go a long way to doing that. And if he ends up landing there, I am an unabashed Derek Carr hater. I don't think he's a very good quarterback. I think that he decides what he's going to do before the snap, and that's what he does. That, like, there's no reading the defense. There's no reading what happens. I think Antonio Brown would have been horrible there. Maybe not horrible. Horrible might be an overstatement, but the way Antonio Brown wins is by making the defense commit and then reacting to that. That's not how Derek Carr wins. Derek Carr makes a read, and you'll see plays where he'll throw an interception or he'll throw a ball where there's nobody because he's already made up his mind that the ball is going to go there. So regardless of who comes in, I'm more excited about that quarterback than I am Derek Carr.
So is CeeDee Lamb comparable to Keenan Allen? In a way, I mean, I know Keenan Allen wins mostly underneath.
I think he's more physical.
Okay,
like I think he can do more things than Keenan Allen. I think that Keenan Allen is very, very technical and gets open with the precise routes that he runs. Lamb can do that, but he can also be physical and go up and get it, which Keenan Allen doesn't necessarily do.
So, and the reason I bring that up is we know what we know what the Los Angeles Chargers were with Tyrell Williams and Keenan Allen. Now imagine that if Phillip Rivers goes to Las Vegas with the Raiders and they somehow get CeeDee Lamb along with Tyrell Williams again, that attack can be very potent. And then you have another phenomenal tight end there. So that attack could be very potent next year.
And don't sleep on my man Hunter Renfrow in the slot there too. Like
right.
he was stealing when he was healthy. He was stealing targets from Waller. He was stealing end zone looks from Waller. That guy gets open.
So yeah, I mean, imagine that. Like, I don't love the thought of them signing these older QBs because it just doesn't make sense to me. But if you are able to get CeeDee Lamb, you get a healthy Renfrow back, you get a healthy Jacobs back, you already have Darren Waller signed, and you have Tyrell Williams signed. That offense becomes really, really scary, and it's a good offensive line as well, which is something that Phillip Rivers needs.
Now, the Oakland Raiders, like a few teams actually, but and this is kind of part and parcel of what you would expect from the Oakland, or I guess Las Vegas Raiders at this point. Sometimes they eschew all skills at the wide receiver position other than speed. Oftentimes, that's the only thing that they look at. And if that's the case, I mean, is there a guy out there that fulfills that role? Devin Duvernay, for example, is he a guy that you think can come into a team that is just looking for a legitimate deep threat and adequately provide that role for them and more?
Yeah, now you're looking at guys like Duvernay, Ruggs. I think Chenault is a deep threat, but not with that speed. And I think Rager is the guy with that speed, but isn't necessarily just a deep threat, even though he wants to just run by everybody all the time. So there are a few players in this class that have that real speed threat.
I agree with Zach. Listen, Zach, I will always defer to guys like Zach and Ray who study the film. it's just too early for me to be looking in depth to these guys. If you are looking at Devian, if you really want to start studying rookies, guys like Zach and Ray, like I said, you need to be following them.
Well, and it's to me. So I'm looking at these guys. I'm looking at the film right now, getting an idea of my perception of these players. So this is I'm gonna kind of strip back the process a little bit, just quick. So I watch the film, and the way I watch film is I will mark down what I see. So if I see something positive, boom, there's a little plus what he did. If he does that multiple times, I'm a lot more interested in that than if a player does something once. So you see, there was a play that Brian Edwards made, and he went up and caught the ball one hand, like made an OBJ play right by the end zone. A lot of people are going to get excited about that play that Brian Edwards made. I'm a lot more excited about some of the technical routes that he's running, the way that he will run at the back foot of a defender, get the defender to turn, and then cut and make his route. I'm a lot more excited about that than I am about the highlight play. So I'll watch film like that. Once I'm done, once I've got my idea, that's when I start listening to some of these metrics analysts, the guys like Peter Howard, the guys like Jesse Reeves, all of these people who crunch the numbers. And now I want to see if their numbers are matching what I'm seeing. And when they do, great. When they don't, I'm going to go back and watch film again to see if I'm seeing something different this time that matches with the numbers, or if we just don't jive at all. And so like I think it's valuable to be paying attention to film right now, but I also think that it's just one step in this process. Then once you get the metric analysis, then you have the draft. And then that gives you another piece, because draft capital is more important than anything that we're talking about, because draft capital gives you an opportunity. So I'm seeing if I think a player is good. The metrics are telling me, that he won. I'm seeing how he won. And then the NFL tells me the opportunity he's going to get to win that way in the NFL.
Now, there's been a lot of word. There's been a lot of hullabaloo actually coming from the Cincinnati Bengals about what they're going to do at the quarterback position. Obviously, the odds-on favorite to be the number one pick in the draft is Joe Burrow, but the Bengals don't need to be the team to make the number one pick in the draft. They have every option of trading available to them as well, and there's been a lot of talk about how they're really, really excited about Justin Herbert coming out of Oregon. Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Tua Tagovailoa. I think these are the consensus top three quarterbacks in this draft. Are these the only guys that we need to know about, or do we think that, a guy that you mentioned before, Love, or one of the other guys in this draft is kind of going to be the Gardner Minshew and maybe be that guy that nobody really thought of, maybe it's drafted a little bit later, but still sees valuable playing time and maybe establishes himself as a starter this year?
I think if anybody, it's going to be Love, because he can make plays with his legs, and that's been the type of quarterback that, and I'll be the first to admit that I am not as good at evaluating quarterback play as I am at evaluating running backs and wide receivers and tight ends. Like quarterbacks are an entirely different animal, and they're so dependent on the players around them and the scheme that's being run. But I do think that those top three that you're talking about, Herbert, you're talking about Tua, who I'm really excited. Tua Tagovailoa, it lines up perfectly with supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. So like,
look at that mind already working.
I've already got that going.
And Tyler Boyd touchdowns, perfect with that too.
So you think he's going to Cincy? I've already got that rolling. So Burrows, Tua, and right, Justin Herbert are the three names you're going to hear. But there are a couple of other guys who do things with their legs, and those are the quarterbacks that I've missed on in the last couple of drafts. And those are the players who can actually come in and make a difference in fantasy, especially.
I 100% there. I mean, if there's like you said, we panned Josh Allen in 2018, but in terms of fantasy, he still may not be a great passing quarterback, but in terms of fantasy football, he runs the ball, and that is extremely, extremely valuable. And he finished as a top 10. Was he top 10 this season? Top 10 QB.
Oh, yeah.
Kyler Murray was right on the verge of QB1 as well.
With only 20 touchdowns, 20 passing touchdowns.
Yeah, so it's just when you're looking at those guys that have the ability to throw, Josh Allen kind of almost being the exception. He did. I'll admit he was better this season. But yeah, I mean, any guys that can make plays in the NFL, you have to pay attention to.
Now, let's kind of go from the rookies to guys already in the league. We already talked about Austin Hooper potentially not being on the same team going into the season. Another tight end that maybe some people don't realize is a free agent this year is Hunter Henry. Obviously, the Chargers have a lot of reshaping to do on that team if they truly are walking away from Phillip Rivers. Does that also mean walking away from Hunter Henry? And if that's the case, where does Hunter Henry land? And is he the same player that you would expect? Is he the same level of production you would expect in another jersey?
Yeah, I mean, I think they probably re-sign him. But if he's going somewhere, the real good landing spots, I mean, we've already talked about Jacksonville. We've already talked about Washington as being a good landing spot. Arizona, I think, is another decent landing spot for a tight end, although they've run a lot of 4 wide receiver sets. And so, maybe there's not as much meat on the bone there. And Pittsburgh, I think, is another place where you could end up with a tight end that would be, a nice spot. You have a chance to score some touchdowns, which is what Hunter Henry needs. Hunter Henry is a red zone guy. I mean, he is making his bones catching touchdowns.
What would be interesting is a place like if Drew Brees comes back and because, I mean, look at Jared Cook. I mean, and yes, he's put up back-to-back tremendous seasons, but I mean, let's be realistic. Hunter Henry is far better than Jared Cook. And we keep comparing any tight end in New Orleans to Jimmy Graham. And I would say, I mean, like guys like Kobe Fleener, Jared Cook, those guys aren't going to live up to that billing. Hunter Henry has that talent, and he would be a tremendous red zone threat. And that would be kind of a swing that New Orleans could take. My thing is, and I just don't know if the Spanoses will pay money. To me, they're in a rebuild at this point. I mean, they have a lot of contracts coming up here. I mean, Melvin Gordon's gone. Obviously, Phillip Rivers is gone.
Just to add some numerical value to that, the Chargers have $48.7 million in cap, but like you were saying, they have so many moving pieces. Only 49 players are signed at the current moment. That's the second least in the league.
And you have Joey Bosa's contract coming up. You have Melvin Ingram contract coming up. Keenan Allen, I believe, is up after this season. So you have a lot of big contracts coming up. So, I mean, to me, I think it would be a mistake to sign somebody like Hunter Henry to double-digit millions of dollars when it looks like they are going to be in a rebuild phase at some point here in the next couple of seasons.
Let's talk about wide receivers now. What are we supposed to do with both Robbie Anderson, who is a reported target for the Green Bay Packers, and a guy like Will Fuller, who kind of has a similar skill set, but seemingly can't stay on the field? often enough to really be a valued contributor? Do we think that there is still space on your dynasty teams, or there should still be space on your dynasty teams for these game-breaking kind of one-catch wide receivers? Or do we think that the risk on these types of wide receivers is maybe outweighing having that roster spot for someone else that you can at least have some reliable level of production week to week from?
I think the problem with those two players is, what are you going to get in return? And is it going to be worth more than especially Fuller, what he's going to give you when he's healthy? Because if Will Fuller is healthy and he's playing, he's going to produce for you. I mean, it's kind of like that Deshaun Jackson, where everyone thinks he's a boom bust. But if you actually break down the numbers, the boom is big, but then a lot of times they're actually producing enough to get you, a good fantasy score. They're putting up more than 50 yards and a couple of catches, so they're putting up more than 10 points. So if he's your wide receiver 3 or 4, you're really excited about that, because he can give you those boom weeks where he's putting up 25 points. Robbie Anderson, I'm not as excited about, especially. I keep going around with Kyle about the Green Bay offense, and the more I watch, the less interested I am having pieces that aren't Devontae Adams and whoever their running back is going to be. So Aaron Jones this year was phenomenal, but I think Aaron Rodgers is so efficient with what he does that it's really hard to have enough meat on the bone for multiple receivers in that offense, even though it's a great offense and it seems like one that we should be excited about having pieces. I'm just not.
What about the Robbie Anderson to the Denver Broncos?
That would be fantastic. I think that's exactly what they need.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're talking about. He is the Marvin Jones type, where you have the jump ball guy in Cortland Sutton. You need that speedy outside receiver. You have a guy with a big arm at quarterback. Instead of drafting somebody, which I believe they need to really go in hard on defense here, sign Robbie Anderson to a relatively cheap contract, 2-3 seasons, and you have that outside receiver.
A relatively cheap $14 million a year, because that's what you're going to need to sign Robbie Anderson.
I don't know if I agree with that, but we'll see. We'll see about this offseason.
All right, so let's talk about some poison pills. We talked about Damian Williams at the top of this podcast. Last year, the value that was placed on Damian Williams compared to the level of production we actually got from him during the regular season, and then it went full circle back to us seeing him blow up in the playoffs again and having expectations for next year. I think expectations is kind of the takeaway here, and DJ Chark, David Montgomery, and Kenyon Drake are guys that kind of have different levels of expectations, but that were very, very much affected by maybe a small sample size of playing, or a small sample size of being elite, or maybe a larger sample size of not necessarily getting the opportunities to consistently produce. Chark was a guy that we saw a lot from this year. People are expecting a lot more moving forward. Kenyon Drake seemingly took DJ's job. I would remind people that DJ is still signed there for a number of years. He's not going anywhere. If the Arizona Cardinals care about their cap at all, is there one of these 3 guys that maybe you're taking the other way with when it comes to the dynasty trade wins, or you kind of view all these guys as maybe solid but risky bets? What are your thoughts on guys that are listed here and guys that might be in this category as well that I haven't gone over yet?
I really want to hear Zach's thoughts on David Montgomery, because he's somebody that I was against basically the entire season. What I saw of him, he was slow. He danced a lot in the backfield. He did show flashes at points, but I just don't know if he's up to the speed of the NFL.
Yeah, and I also think that Chicago didn't do him any favors. I think that the play calling there and the quarterback. I mean, I don't think Trubisky's any great shakes at quarterback. And David Montgomery was a player that I really liked because he had the ability to really have a role in the receiving game. Well, in Chicago, he's not getting that big role as a receiver. He's not going to put up astounding statistics as a pure running back. And as disappointing as his rookie season was, he still was a top 24 running back. I mean, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't like, don't get me wrong, I'm not taking a victory lap on David Montgomery. It was a bad season, but he still finished as a top 24 running back. The problem with Montgomery is I don't see it getting much better. That team is what they are, and I don't see him carving out much more of a role as a receiver. He got the carries that I thought he would. He got 220 or 230 carries. I mean, that's what I thought he would get. He got that the bell cow role. He just didn't get it in the receiving game, and that's not how David Montgomery succeeds. So I'm really sad to say that if you can get something for him, I probably would.
242 carries, by the way.
Yeah,
Only 886 yards, which is rough. I don't know. My thing with like guys like DJ Chark is he took a step forward. Is he? And it's not like he and I think Zach laid this out pretty well, but it's not like he wasn't facing cornerback ones the entire season, and he had 5 or more targets in every game but one that he played. So it'll be interesting to see what is going to happen with the quarterback situation. But like Zach said, especially in this class, if you can get like a mid-first round pick for him, which I think you probably could if somebody believes in him that much, especially about what he did. I'd rather have Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, any one of those like top 5 or 6 running backs in this class over DJ Chark.
Yeah. I think we've gotten to the point. So the 2020 class was hyped like big time for forever. And then you had ETN go back, and you had Chuba Hubbard go back. So you had a couple guys go back, and then everyone was like, "Oh no, this class isn't deep anymore." You look at what's still there. You look at running backs. You look at Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Cam Akers. Okay, so those 5 running backs, I'm very confident are NFL caliber running backs. Mm-hmm. Then you look at wide receivers and you say CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Bryan Edwards, Jerry Jeudy, Tyler Johnson, Jalen Reagor, Antonio Gandy-Golden, T. Higgins, Laviska Shenault, Henry Ruggs. Like, now all of a sudden, where are you? You're in halfway into the second round. Like, this class is still very deep with NFL caliber talent, and there are going to be some other guys who sneak up on us that produce.
I tell you another poison pill that I think could be a poison pill this season is Terry McLaurin. He was he was on people's radar per se, but he wasn't part of even the top 10 wide receivers for most people in last year's class. And it was not a good wide receiver class. And he now has Dwayne Haskins, who looked I don't even know how to describe Dwayne Haskins at this point.
He's not very good.
No. And while
he could be replaced, he could be the same thing that happened to the guy in Arizona could happen.
Rosen.
But yeah, he did put up some numbers with Dwayne Haskins, 4 of the last 5 games, but I can't trust that. And Zach said he liked Kelvin Harmon coming out. But that they are wanting to run the ball, even though Darius Geis has he's on his 4th knee at the age of 22 or something. Adrian Peterson's 43, going on 60. a lot of hype around Terry McLaurin. And again, if you can get like a late first or even early second for Terry McLaurin, I might be doing that in this class. Terry McLaurin scares me. Actually, really, it's more that Dwayne Haskins scares me more than anything.
Yeah, and so I wasn't a fan of Haskins coming out. I thought that he kind of got like Paris Campbell made some very easy throws for him. Paris Campbell got open underneath a ton. McLaurin was not, and I will fully admit, was not on my radar coming out because he just didn't see enough volume. I mean, and that's why he wasn't on any of the metrics evals. Like he didn't see enough volume. He didn't have enough market share. And as a film evaluator, I mean, if you're only getting 30 passes thrown to you or completed to you, like, how do I evaluate that? How do I evaluate that sample size? The thing that really turned me on, though, to McLaurin was in the preseason, and it wasn't even a play. It wasn't even video. It was an interview that he gave. And the reporter asked him about a play he made in a preseason game, and he explained completely what he was thinking and why he took the angle he did to give the quarterback the sight line to get him the ball. And making that connection and thinking about your craft like that really, really turned me back on to Terry McLaurin in the preseason. And I did an episode where I was like, look, I saw this. I understand I didn't love Terry McLaurin. Peter Howard is going to hate this episode because I'm going to talk about Preston Williams and Terry McLaurin. But man, he just like, if you, as an athlete at that level, you got to have something that sets you apart. And if it's your brain, if it's the way you think about your approach to a route, that sets him apart. And man, he beat some people with his brain, with his route running, with his ability to set up a defender and then give his quarterback that big separation and that target, that angle. I like McLaurin. I don't like Haskins. The situation makes me nervous, but man, I like McLaurin.
Really quickly, before we go on or off of our 5-point inspection to actually getting into today's roster, I made a quick trade involving Terry McLaurin. I want you guys to just give me your ideas on. I traded my boy Cooper Kupp. I traded him along with James Conner. And I received DJ Chark, Terry McLaurin, and Mike Williams. How would you grade that trade?
I think you probably won it, but I also think that Cooper Kupp is probably the most productive piece in that for the short term. So I think long term you win. It's a trade that I would like to make because I always like to stack up young receivers that I think are going to be productive.
All right, repeat the trade again. It was you traded Cooper Kupp. I just want you to reemphasize that.
Cooper Kupp, James Conner, for Mike Williams, Terry McLaurin, DJ Chark.
I like that for you. I like DJ. I think Zach and I are kind of going different directions on these two wide receivers a little bit. I like Chark a lot, though I would sell. And I don't mind Terry McLaurin. I'm afraid of his QB situation right now. But like Zach said, young wide receivers. This is Dynasty. Those guys are good for 10 years, so it's not like you have to cash in on that right now. I think it's probably a steal on your end because I don't know what James Conner is right now, or Cooper Kupp for that matter.
That's why I made it. I'm not going to talk about Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp finished wide receiver 4. People need to stop the Cooper Kupp. James Conner is why I made the trade.
No, let's talk about Cooper Kupp here. I understand what he did on the season, but there were some games there where it was just like, well, I mean, listen, the last five games, he was basically saved by 5 straight touchdowns. If it weren't for that, he would have been, and yes, I understand he is going to be a major red zone weapon for Jared Goff, but Jared Goff, it seemed like took a step back, and there were times in this season where Cooper Kupp basically didn't exist. So that was kind of scary for me. Now, with Robert Woods possibly gone, probably likely gone, his value is probably relatively high. But yeah, I think the James Conner piece is the one that kind of gets me, where it's like you trading away James Conner for like a DJ Chark and Mike Williams, kind of. I mean, however you want to put it, but I think you win this trade because you're getting rid of a very questionable asset for 3 very solid assets.
I'm contractually obligated not to say anything bad about James Conner, because that's Kyle. Like, that's Kyle's guy. Like, man. But I agree. Can I nod?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Again, that was number one. That was the number one reason. I think this is, again, something that I think a lot of people don't necessarily pay attention to when making deals. Oftentimes, I'm just trading away risk. That's all it is. I don't necessarily think, all things considered, if you knew these guys were going to play 16 games next season, that this is that unbalanced of a trade. But when you throw in the idea of, okay, this guy is in a situation that I can't predict, or this guy has an injury situation like James Conner that might not see him be the starter going into next season, I think packaging a guy like that while there's still some semblance of value is probably the right way to go, just to mitigate risk, which is all you're really trying to do on a dynasty team for the long run, for me anyway. But that is going to be the end of our 5-point inspection today. We're going to get into the good stuff, get into the reason that you guys tuned into the show. We're going to plug in the analyzer and get to this week's Dynasty Diagnostic, and it is our episode 56 roster. It was submitted by Sean C. You can find him on Twitter at Sean_C11. Please make sure to give him a follow. And if you want to be part of next week's show, all you have to do is follow the Dynasty Diagnostic on Twitter. Smash that subscribe button and leave us a review at the link in the description on iTunes and or Podbean, preferably iTunes, really.
By the way, this roster is old. We do have a backlog of rosters. I didn't have time to get it updated. I will reach out to you when it's your turn to try and get an updated roster. I didn't have time this week, so keep that in mind. There are a lot of players on this roster that need to be discussed, so that's why I like this roster, but just keep in mind that it is old, so some of these guys are probably irrelevant at this point.
If you do want to send us a roster, please go ahead and go to Dynasty Diagnostic, Dino Diagnostic on Twitter. Go ahead and send us a DM, and we will be able to go through that roster for you. But let's now get into the roster itself. It's a 12-team, half point per reception. Start 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 2 flex, and no super flex roster. So that last point is very important. With no super flex, we have Lamar Jackson, Baker Mayfield, and Marcus Mariota on this team. I mean, does Baker Mayfield hold any trade value in a 1 QB at this point?
Yeah, maybe. Not much. I just offered. I'm in a single quarterback league and just offered Dak Prescott straight up for Jarvis Landry and got laughed at. So like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. The value in 1 quarterback leagues of quarterbacks is not very high.
The funny part for me is I think people hear those things from us, like, in 2 QB and Superflex, QB value is crazy through the roof, and they take it too far, and it's the opposite 1 QB where you're like, do I want? I mean, in my mind, Dak is a top 5 fantasy quarterback. Do I want a top 5 quarterback or a potential top 24 wide receiver who his situation not the best? I mean, yeah, he had a good year, but I think just people take that over the top where it's like, okay, like I had a, and then some people just have no idea what they're talking about. I tried to trade for Lamar Jackson, like right after the season ended. I offered something like, I offered Tannehill, Alvin Kamara, and I want to say Juju for Hopkins and Lamar Jackson, and I got laughed at. So I don't know like what All right, whatever. I mean, people are weird.
I'm biting your hand off for that.
Huh?
I'm biting your hand off for that. That deal. Yeah. I'm taking that 100%.
Right. But I agree with Zach here. It's one of those things where it's like Baker's value's definitely far lower than it was at the beginning of last season. Even though I'm not a huge fan of Baker, I think he is due for positive regression this season, especially with Freddie Kitchens out. Hopefully Todd Monken calling the plays this season. So I think you can wait on Baker. If you're wanting to trade one of those guys, I think you can wait and Baker's value will come back up. And then we don't have to talk about Marcus Mariota, right?
No, you could probably cut him.
If this is a super flex, are you happy?
No, because I don't know if Marcus Mariota regains a starting position.
Well, but you got 220 first. You might be able to make up for it there. So
that's fair. Yeah. That's a good point.
All right. So now let's get into the running backs. David Johnson, the still signed David Johnson, one of the highest caps at the RB position in the NFL. David Johnson, still has major question marks when it comes to his dead cap versus his actual cap. David Johnson, Marlon Mack, who is in discussions with the Colts to extend his contract. Sony Michel, I don't even know what to say about Sony Michel, so I'm not going to try. Ronald Jones, the resurgent Ronald Jones, Justin Jackson, and Chris Thompson at running back. Now, Stompy, I'm going to ask you to respectfully look away because this might cause you some more anxiety that you have to deal with this running back room. But I'm going to start with you, Zach. Are you okay with this running back room? Do you think it's salvageable, or is this a situation where you just play a self-destruct?
That's 4 question marks right there to start, and then Justin Jackson and Chris Thompson, who they're probably not cracking your lineup. But David Johnson is a question mark for me. Although I do think that you saw him get injured. I think you saw him be a top 6 running back in PPR while he was healthy.
While Christian Kirk was injured, by the way, he was catching passes.
Yeah, but then you saw him be slow. You saw him not be able to hit holes. You saw him not be able to get the edge. It was just ugly. Marlon Mack, I've got on a whole bunch of my rosters, and I'm not thrilled about having him. Like I liked having him this year, but he makes me very nervous. Sony Michel. Man, unrequited love, just never reciprocated. It was the Sony coming out ahead as the RB2 in that class. I thought he was going to come in and catch passes. Look, Belichick knows how to use running backs out of the backfield. No. 6 catches, no. And then Ronald Jones. That's a backfield that I am blowing up and trying to figure out what I'm doing.
David Johnson next year, if the Arizona Cardinals cut or trade David Johnson, they owe $2 million to the salary cap gods. That's how bad it is.
I love the albatross running back contracts in the NFC West. Like, what were you thinking out there? Like, I get it. Todd Gurley and David Johnson are fantastic talents. But at some point, like, they have to listen to analytics people and be like, running back does not matter. Like, it does not matter.
What are you talking about? Zeke is the most valuable person in the NFL.
Get Dak some guys that can catch a football. Jesus. But yeah, I mean, like Zach said, it's question mark after, like, looking at this before the 2018 season, you're just like, okay, Marlon Mack is looking to be the starter after Frank Gore is gone. David Johnson looking to be healthy and back and looks to like he's going to be a bell cow again. Sony Michel had a monster senior season. Rojo, a lot of question marks around Rojo, but he still was a top 5 running back in that class. it looked good coming out before 2018, but now you got, well, what the hell happened to David Johnson? Kenyon Drake somehow took over that role. Marlon Mack doesn't catch footballs, and he may be not the starter next season if the Colts decide to go running back here. Sony Michel doesn't catch footballs, and I think a lot of people will go, oh, well, Sony Michel went to the New England Patriots. Of course, why did you trust that? And then it'll start a whole hullabaloo about, well, the New England Patriots actually are the best running team in the NFL. If you look back at the past, it's like, I don't really care. Sony Michel doesn't catch footballs either. Rojo had flashes again this season, doesn't catch footballs. Your best pass catcher on this team is Chris Thompson, and that dude is injured constantly. The one piece I'm interested in here is Justin Jackson. And it's because Melvin Gordon is likely gone, or likely he is gone. Justin Jackson has been relatively efficient in his first 2 seasons with the ball in his hand. Now, he hasn't gotten a bell cow or a large workload, but if he is next to Austin Eckler this next season, I mean, if he's your RB3-4, I'm not hating that. And he had a fantastic senior season at Northwestern, and he was a guy I really liked coming out in 2018 as well. So Justin Jackson's about the only interesting piece here. I mean, I think everything else is a question mark. And so, yeah, I agree. You need to blow this up. But like Zach said, you have 2 firsts and 3 seconds, and this running back class is great. So you could kind of reload here. If you keep David Johnson around just to see what happens, and you get somebody like Swift and Cam Akers, I feel pretty good about that moving forward.
I can mess with Marlon Mack. I can mess with a newly re-signed Marlon Mack. I understand he doesn't catch footballs, but if he's RB15, RB16 for me, I'm just fine with that as long as I have the wide receiver room to kind of balance it out. In fact, those are the types of guys that I tend to target because those are the types of guys that are inexpensive. And, I mean, they still provide you with that baseline level of value that you need. But, yeah, like you guys were mentioning, everything else, I mean, what do? You just kind of throw your hands up at this point. I guess my question to you would be, you have those picks. Is this a situation where it's reset and you just say, screw it all, and you get what you can get and make those picks, and those new picks are your starting running backs? Or is this a situation where you see 1 or 2 pieces and you're like, okay, well, I can maybe package this guy with a pick to maybe get something a little bit better?
I don't know what you're packaging here is my issue. Because nobody's buying David Johnson. So what? I mean, David Johnson on the first is going to get you what?
Whatever our first would get you.
Right. So it's one of those things where it's like, I would rather, with this class coming in, I would rather take the chance on those running backs coming in and that talent than I would trying to trade for a running back at this point.
I hate to jump ahead, but what I would do with this roster, and I'm gonna mess up your flow, but I'm looking at these tight ends. The way I play tight end, I don't care about tight. I don't see Kittle. And I don't see Travis Kelce on this tight end list. Beyond that, I don't care. The next 15 tight ends are very similar. I know you've got Mark Andrews on this team. I know you've got Evan Ingram on this team. I'm excited because other people are excited about those 2 players. Those are the players that I am going to start shopping in order to revamp this roster.
I do think that's what you have to do given the limitations of what's on the current roster. I don't necessarily know if I would take that same stance with you, but yes, given this roster of who's valuable, of who's hot, and who's going to be tradable, yeah, I can definitely see where you're coming from. But before we get into tight end 100%, let's move on to the wide receivers. OBJ, Julio Jones, Sammy Watkins, AJG, Hollywood Brown. Which Washington is this? There's a lot of Washington.
Sorry, James Washington.
Okay. Larry Fitzgerald, MVS, Jalen Hurd, and Marquise Goodwin. The last 4 of those, I think we can just kind of leave by the wayside for now.
Did you just say throw Fitz by the wayside?
I'm sorry. 3 of those. 3 of those. Larry Fitzgerald is undefeated forever. But OBJ, Julio, Watkins, AJG, Hollywood Brown, James Washington. I mean, what do you do with this wide receiver core? For me, I feel like the talent's there, but you might be frustrated from what you saw last season. Sammy Watkins is kind of one of those characters that he's already kind of come out and said that he doesn't know if he's going to be playing in 2020. I've often said, look at his contract. Nicole Hardman's the guy you wanted that offense because the Chiefs are going to need to cut salary and because you're going to need to pay Patrick Mahomes. Is there a guy or two that you feel safe with? And at this point, obviously people are going to say, well, sell the older receiver. Have we gotten past the point of selling Julio? For me, I'm kind of at the point where if you haven't sold Julio already, you're kind of riding Julio into the sunset. Do you guys feel the same, or do you think that improvements can be made by chopping and changing this unit?
I think I think you're going to have to stick, personally. I don't think there's a ton of value here. I mean, OBJ still should be considered probably a top 5 wide receiver at this point. Julio, like you said, his value, like the return on value is not going to be great, and you're probably still going to get 2 or 3 wide receiver 1 seasons right from here on. Watkins, his values dipped a ton. AJG, his values dipped. I'm holding on to Hollywood. I like this wide receiver room for the next 2 to 3 seasons, which really you should only be looking that far out in terms of dynasty. I think you're fine with this wide receiver room because you're not going to get a ton of value out of it right now, but you could end up getting a lot of production out of it next season in the following couple seasons.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the construct of the league and the starters, so you've only got to start 2 running backs. You've got to start 3 wide receivers, and then you've got to come up with 2 flexes. All right, so Julio's my wide receiver 1. I'm very happy with that. Although he did come off a down year where he didn't have 100 receptions and he didn't have quite 1,400 yards. So, like, he's really down. He had 99 catches and, like, 1,390 something for yards. So you know, he's way down. You got OBJ as your wide receiver 2. I expect him to rebound. It's really hard to come onto a new team in your first year, especially with as poorly as Baker Mayfield played. I expect a resurgence from both of them this year. So I'm happy with him as my wide receiver 2. I'm looking around to see if J Mike is in this league because I'll trade him Sammy Watkins and make a profit. And now you're kind of hoping that AJ Green comes back and is your wide receiver 3. He could be a wide receiver 1 if he's healthy. So you're excited about that. And then Fitz as your wide receiver 4, and then whatever you get from James Washington and Hollywood Brown. Like, I don't think that's a horrible receiving core, especially if you can work something with your draft picks to add running backs, and you can work something with a trade with one of these tight ends. I think you can actually have a pretty good roster with what you've got with a few moves.
I don't understand why people are disrespecting Hollywood Brown the way that they're disrespecting Hollywood Brown, but it's starting to annoy me. Last season, Hollywood Brown had the number 4 overall cushion, 5.08 yards of cushion on every snap. People are afraid of this guy's speed and his yards per target, his yards per pass route, I might add. 2.25, number 25 in the entire league. This guy was operating as a top 24 receiver. People are afraid of him because they kind of think he's the same thing as Deshaun Jackson in terms of the injuries. But as you were talking about before, yeah, that's the risk with Deshaun Jackson. But you're also getting a valued contribution pretty much every game the guy plays in Deshaun Jackson. I think it's going to be the same thing with Hollywood Brown. So for that reason, along with Julio, along with OBJ, I'm okay with this group. I do think that youth is needed. It's definitely going to be somewhere you're going to need to invest some draft capital in over the next couple of seasons just to make sure that you keep it churning in the manner that you should. But I think it's a decent group for this next season. Moving into the tight ends, we're going to go right back into that conversation you were having with Evan Ingram, and also with having the ability to field both him and Andrews and Mark Andrews on the same team. I don't necessarily know if I would take that same stance, but like I was saying before, with this roster and maybe the lack of tradable assets, I can see where you're coming from. I just think that Mark Andrews and Evan Ingram should almost kind of be viewed as top 15 wide receivers in that respect, because their production when they're active, and that's kind of the key point here, is essentially what you would find from a lower level wide receiver 1, higher level wide receiver 2. So I think that these guys can be very, very valuable just in the fact that they give you an advantage over the majority of the league, because tight end as a whole is kind of a cluster. Where do you stand with that, Sam?
I'm actually with Zach here. I love Mark Andrews. And I think stacking Lamar Jackson with Mark Andrews is extremely smart. I did that in a few leagues. But, I mean, if you can get somebody like Zach said, if you don't have George Kittle or Travis Kelce, I mean, the gap. So the difference this season between Travis Kelce and George Kittle on a points per game basis was 0.1. Between George Kittle and Austin Hooper was 1.3 fantasy points per game. So the gap is gigantic. And then there's a cluster from Austin. And then if you go from like Austin Hooper down to Tyler Higbee, it's like a 3-point gap. And Tyler Higbee being the tight end 11 in points per game. So I think I agree here. I've never been a guy that values tight ends because there's no incentive to do it. There's the elite tier, and then everything else is kind of muddled mess between like 3 and 15, like Zach said earlier. And you have guys coming up like Mike Gesicki, who showed he took a step forward, and especially in the second half of the season from week 9 on, he was a top 12 tight end. And you can get Mike Gesicki and like, let's say a 2022nd for Mark Andrews, or maybe even the 2021st if somebody values him crazy high.
Is there any concern maybe putting too much value on Dolphins, though, just given the amount of flexibility that they do have going into next season? They have $89 million in cap space, the number 1 cap space in the entire league, and draft picks to burn.
I think you took that too literally. The point was there are young guys that you can get. Ian Thomas is another one.
Yes.
That you can get for like, and you can get similar production and an extra piece that you could still help build that running back core with. So if let's just say you were able to get a second round pick plus, we'll say Ian Thomas, since you hate the Dolphins for some reason. And Ian Thomas is, and it, I mean, this offense is going to change. It is Mike McCarthy, what have you, but I don't think you're losing a whole lot going from Mark Andrews to Ian Thomas, and then you pick up and you can trade like those 4 second-round picks or 2 of those second-round picks to move up and get another first-round pick. And now you have the chance to get three of the top 5 running backs in this class, or 2 top 5 running backs and a young wide receiver. And you've all of a sudden built a team that's going to last for like several years here.
Well, and that's the thing to me. If you look at the, what you're giving up at tight end and what you can get back, and then you look at what you can turn that into, and the gap between what you're starting right now in your running back room and what you can add to that, you're gaining so many points. I think people get so hung up on like individual positions and like what you're gaining from, your tight end, but you're scoring as a team. So if you give up 2 points at tight end, but gain 6 points at running back, your net 4-point win. So like the fact that tight end is an absolute wasteland is actually a positive thing if you can get around, get your head around the idea that you don't need to have a name tight end. I mean, heck, Darren Waller this year was not even being drafted at the beginning of the year.
He was like tight end 23 or something.
Yeah, and he finished as a top 6. Same with Jared Cook. I mean, there are these guys every single year, and on the Dynasty Dummies, we do a tight end show because this is my jam. Where like I will mine those tight ends, and Kyle does the cheat sheet. Although he didn't last year because he had a son, and so he was kind of doing other things. I guess he had his handful changing diapers and that sort of thing. But he does a cheat sheet where if you look at the tight end, the predictiveness of his cheat sheet, like he gave you Kittle, he gave you a whole bunch of, he gave you Everett, he gave you you just look at these guys who pop in his cheat sheet, and it's players that we missed on film. It's players that other guys missed with their metrics, but he kind of aggregates everything. And all of a sudden you're hitting on some of these really late tight ends that become phenomenal players. That's where the value is. It's not in the players who already have a name. It's in looking at some of these guys who are coming up to their age 26, 27, 28 season who have flashed but haven't really produced. That's the window for tight ends. That's the peak of their athletic performance. Because I think tight end, there's a lot to the tight end position because you've got to learn how to block and you've got to learn how to run routes. And so you've got an awful lot more responsibilities than any of the other positions. So I think it takes a little bit of time to mature. And so you see these guys come into their own at 26, 27, 28, 29 and be productive.
2 questions. If you're trading these guys, are you okay with David Njoku back? Are you okay with O.J. Howard back? And if you're not, is there some help to come in this draft from Hunter Bryant, from Alberto Guegmunam, from Thaddeus Moss, Harrison Bryant, Cole Kmet, Bryson Hopkins? Any of these guys really doing it for you?
No, and you don't want rookie tight ends anyway. Rookie tight ends aren't like the idea that rookie tight ends are going to come in and produce is such a fallacy. And you saw Evan Ingram do it because everybody on the Giants got hurt that year, and he was the only receiver that was still standing. I mean, I think Sterling Shepard was also healthy and had like 9 touchdowns that year. Like that was the year. So no, don't go after tight ends in the rookie draft. Yes, definitely go after some of these tight ends. O.J. Howard, I would love to get O.J. Howard back. Love to get Njoku back.
Tyler Higbee.
Love to get Higbee back. Look,
Guess
Gerald
what?
Everett.
But here's my thing with Higbee is he was extended. Gerald Everett was not.
No.
Tyler Higbee is 27 now, and
Yep.
he had the monster into the season.
Yep.
I would, if I could get Tyler Higbee and again a second or even a late first for Mark Andrews, I would do that in a heartbeat. Because like we talked about, you can build other positions that net you more points than you would get from a tight end. Than you would lose from trading your top tight end.
I love it. All right, guys, that is going to be the end of us going over this roster. Now it's time for the all-important question of Mr. Zach Reed. We're going to start with you. What is this roster to you in car terms?
I think you're going to need maybe some coolant, top off the fluids, maybe some spark plugs. I mean, you're not overhauling the entire team, but you're going to have to do a little maintenance. Definitely vacuum out your carpets. I mean, like I got kids. Maybe pick up the car seats. Vacuum under there. There are probably some stray Cheerios, but you got something to work with.
So, I have a story for you. I was traveling for work, and I had to get a rental car, and it was a Jeep Compass. I have no idea what this car. Like, I have no idea about this car. Accidentally left my fog lights on while I was watching the Super Bowl, come out completely dead.
No.
So, but this leads into this. I think this team needs either a new battery or needs to replace the alternator. Like everything else works. You're just not getting that charge. So if you get a new alternator in there and a new battery, which I view as your running back position here, you're fine. And what that represents to me is using those first round picks and trading that tight end to get more another first round pick and getting those new running backs, that new battery, that new alternator that charges your team up, because everything else works here. Like everything else to me, I mean, having Ingram as my tight end 1, I'm perfectly fine with. Having Tyler Higbee as my tight end 1, I'm perfectly fine with. And if you can pick up somebody like DeAndre Swift, like Cam Akers, like J.K. Dobbins, and you can pair them with that wide receiver group, with that QB group, you're going to be set, and you're going to be a contender for the next 3 seasons.
Is there one running back out of the seemingly top 4 running backs that people are picking that is the end-all, be-all for this team? That is the Band-Aid for this team. Obviously, there's Swift, there's Edwards-Helaire, there's J.K. Dobbins, and so on and so forth. Is there one guy who turns this team around overnight?
It depends on landing spot for me. I think Swift for me is the most talented running back here. Can catch the ball. We've seen him catch the ball. He's a fantastic runner. He's quick. He's a Georgia running back. I mean, you can't really, except for Sony Michel, can't really be mad at the Georgia running backs coming out. If he lands on something like, and I don't know why Kansas City would go this route, but if he lands somewhere like Kansas City, even if he lands in a starting spot somewhere, I think it's got to be DeAndre Swift in my head.
Say, I like Swift, and I think that the top 3 for me of Swift, Taylor, and Dobbins, there's not really much to choose. If you said you were a Swift guy, I'm happy. Like, I'm not going to argue with you. For me, and especially looking down here where I see a half-point PPR, Jonathan Taylor all of a sudden has a little more appeal. And I think you saw him actually catch the ball this past year. He had 24 receptions at Wisconsin this year, but he is a absolute horse when it comes to carrying the ball. And to me, and I hate comps. I absolutely hate comps. But when I see him break off a long run, I can't help but think about watching Nick Chubb. And he's that type of player with even a little more reception production in college. So, that's the guy that if he lands somewhere where he is getting the majority of touches, it's Jonathan Taylor for me.
So I guess on that, and I think it's probably unfair to compare him to this, but every time we talk about Jonathan Taylor, I just get, as a Broncos fan, I get these little flashes of Monty Ball and how dominant he was. And the only reason I say that, I don't think they're the same running back by any means, but just how much they were used in college. Is there any concern for you there with the mileage for Jonathan Taylor?
No, and I think I've read a lot of people that have done research on the number of touches and the yardage, and it's actually a positive thing for NFL backs because it means you were really good really early. And Jonathan Taylor coming out as a junior, obviously has been phenomenal. He's had almost 300 carries every single year. He's had almost 2,000 yards, all 3 years. He's just an uber productive back. He hasn't been injured. He's just built. He's a running back. He's going to come into the NFL and be fantastic. And I'll tell you another thing. After the combine, Stompy, I'm going to tweet at you after he runs the 40 because he's going to be a lot faster than people think.
Oh, I agree. Like you said, I mean, it's a decent comp to Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb ran a 4.45 40, and that dude is a monster. And like you said, he's a lot like Nick Chubb in how he runs. He's got good contact balance. He caught the ball this year, and that was kind of the big question was, is he going to catch a ball? He had 26 receptions this season. So, yeah, I mean, if he lands in a spot that runs the ball, he's going to be a monster.
Yeah, and the other thing that I love about Taylor's his pace. He runs with pace. So he's not coming at you 100 miles an hour all the time, but he's got that second gear. And so when he hits it, it's almost like, a guy throws a changeup, and then he throws that fastball by you, and it may only be 93, but it looks 97 because he's playing with that pace.
I love it. All right, you heard the men. Jonathan Taylor, RB1, at least for this team. But I love it. You got to change the belts. You got to give this car an oil change. You got to make sure to fix up that running back room right. But other than that, you have a solid base here, and we think you have a pretty decent roster. That is going to be the end of the Dynasty Diagnostic for this week. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Thank you so much for chilling with myself, ETAN Mozia on Twitter, with FF Stompy for Sam on Twitter, with Tacit Assassin 13 for Zach. Please go to the Dynasty Diagnostic podcast feed on iTunes. Give us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps the podcast grow and reach more listeners. You can definitely support us on Patreon if that is something you so choose. You can do that by locating us on Twitter, going ahead and clicking the information that we have there. You can also buy our shirts as well as shirts from a bunch of different pods that I know you listen to at storeenvy.com, FF Pod Shirts. It is Dynasty Outhouse's shirt store, and you can find everything that you want in terms of shirts, stickers, anything that you might want from the podcast that you do most frequently listen to. And thank you so much for making it to the Dynasty Diagnostic Service Center today. Please be sure to keep up with your scheduled maintenance and catch us next time to ensure quality performance. See you on your next visit.